Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, and welcome to the first 2025 CISA Colloquium. It's a great pleasure and honor to welcome and introduce Professor Alfio Quarteroni, who is a world-renowned Italian mathematician specialized in numerical analysis, mathematical modeling, and computational sciences. His alma mater is University of Pavia, Alma Ticinensis Universitas. He's a Professor Emeritus at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Lausanne, EPFL, and Professor Emeritus at the Politecnico di Milano, where he created MOX, Modeling and Scientific Computing Center in the Department of Mathematics, and the spin-off MOXOF. Formerly, he has been at CRS4 in Sardinia, at the Catholic University, at CNR, and also I would like to mention several appointments at the University of Minnesota and NASA. Professor Quarteroni is well known for his contribution to the development of numerical methods applied in many diversified fields, including engineering, medicine, and natural sciences. He led the development of models for highly innovative applications, such as simulation of the human heart and the optimization of competitive sailing yacht designs, including those used by the Alinghi team in the America's Cup. And I would like to mention also two ERC, European Research Council Advanced Grants, MathCard and iArt, and two proof of concept. He is author of over 30 books and more than 400 scientific articles. He has received several prestigious awards, including the recent European Academy of Science Blaise Pascal Prize, the ECOMAS, European Community Computational Method in Applied Science, Ritz-Galerkin Medal, IKEAM, International Community Industrial Applied Mathematics, Lagrange Prize, and of course also the Ghislieri Prize. Professor Quarteroni is a member of prominent scientific academies, such as the Accademia dei Lincei, the European Academy of Science, Accademia Europea, and Istituto Lombardo, Scienze Lettere. His research has been groundbreaking in using numerical methods to solve complex problems, making him a central figure in the development of modern applied mathematics. In 2010, 15 years ago, Professor Quarteroni was also appointed as scientific advisor for the establishment of CISA MATLAB. Scientific machine learning, when fundamental sciences meet artificial intelligence, is the title of today's lecture. Thank you, and Alfio, the podium is yours.
So thank you very much, Gianluigi. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, Gianluigi, for this very nice introduction. And of course, thank you very much for inviting me. It's a great honor to be back at CISA after a while. And I know this year is going to be the 15th anniversary. And when we started with very few people, Professor De Simone and a few other people, I was amazed to see this morning that we took a picture and the room 128 was not enough to contain all the people of CISA MATLAB. So this is really astonishing. So I want to congratulate CISA for having granted this type of development, and of course, Gianluigi, who is the main driver of all of that. So it's a big pleasure to be back and say this. So this is my overview, the lecture overview, and we're interested in solving problems, and I call generically this problem physical problem. Physical means problem coming from physics or from engineering, from medicine, and from other fields. Physical means what is real world problem. And traditionally, we have been going through the left-hand column. At least I have been spending my life, my scientific life, in moving through the left column, namely developing a physics-based model, mathematical model, and then solving this model numerically. And this can be generically called digital model, right? But more recently, there is an alternative avenue, which is the one that you see on the right-hand side, and this is the one that we can generate algorithms that are, in principle, not physically informed. So they are blind with respect to the problem that has generated the old stories. So those are two alternative approaches. And scientific machine learning is a way to combine these two approaches in some ways. There is not a precise theory yet, but there are already many successful examples of these possible combinations. So I will talk at the end. I will go first through the left-hand column and then to the right-hand column. And then at the end, I will talk about scientific machine learning. And I would like also to say that scientific machine learning, in my view, is prodromy to developing digital twins. Digital twins is a platform, a scientific platform that is in constant dialogue with the physical problem that has generated this problem here and the numerical methods. And there is a constant exchange of data from the physical problem through sensor, through measurements, to the numerical model and back. The numerical model is there to monitor the physical problem. I'm not sure I'll have the time to talk about digital twins, but this is really a very important and promising kind of development. And I believe that scientific machine learning is very important, very useful to develop digital twins. So I'll go to the left-hand column, the one that we have seen before, this one to the left-hand side. And I'd like to go through this by showing one specific example. So let me remind the rotations here. We have a problem that we want to solve. We have a mathematical model that we formulate in terms of data, D, and U, which is a solution. At the core, there is a relation between data and solution. Then those problems typically are governed by partial differential equations, a differential equation that cannot be solved exactly. So you need to resort to a numerical model where you basically project the whole story upon a subspace of finite dimension. So you have potentially a new solution, which is the numerical solution, but to solve it, you need to go through the computer, and then you need to use algorithms, and then you have to introduce a further model, which is the computational model. And of course, those are the errors that you generate. So to study the quality of your result, you have to basically sum up by triangular inequality all those errors. And in principle, there is a very good theory behind this. There is a very solid theory of stability, consistency, and convergence, and there are estimates that allow mathematicians in general to control the whole process. So here we are on the safe side, right, the left-hand side. We know the theory, we know that analysis is very important, we know that numerical algorithms can be controlled in a proper way, and we have to use suitable algorithms that are stable on the computers, and hopefully to end up with something which is meaningful, say. So the example that I'm going to show in this respect is this one. It's a mathematical heart. We want to reproduce the cardiac physiology. So the heart is a very complex organ, and I'm not going to explain how it works, because I believe that most of you know it very well. But let me just remind that from the physical standpoint, there are many different processes that take place in the heart. The first one is that at every second, for every heartbeat, you have one electrical stimuli that occurs in one specific place of the heart, which is on the right heart, on the upper part of the right heart. There is a place which is called the sinoatrial node, where you have kind of self-excitable cells, kind of pacemaker cells. They generate an impulse, they generate an electrical field, which propagates first to the upper part of the heart, which are the atria, and then down to the lower part, to the ventricles, and it reaches every single cell or cardiomyocyte of the myocardium, and there you have the opening of channels, which are the ionic channels, and through those channels you have ions of calcium or potassium, phosphorus that go back and forth, and they generate a transmembrane electric potential. This transmembrane electric potential in turn generates a force, which is called the active force, and this force is induced by the electricity. This active force creates a train of waves that propagate through say, to neighboring cells, and this, in the end, by an upper scaling, say, will generate the contraction and deformation of the myocardium. And this is not the end of the story, because then in the two atria, in the two ventricles, you have blood, which is a fluid, so you have the fluid dynamics part of the story, and then you have the valves that open and close very suddenly, and you have the perfusion, thanks to the coronaries, and then you have the connection with the external circulation. So this is a kind of conceptual model that you find reproduced here. Every single block reproduces one of those basic physical processes, And the different blocks are connected to one another through the exchange of information, which are basically the continuity of some physical quantities that you see reproduced there. So this is just the conceptualization of the whole story. And when you go to equations, you have to develop a model, a mathematical model, and this is the model. So this reproduces not all of the equations, but the most important equations. As you see, you have the electrophysiology, the cellular ions dynamics, the active force at the cardiomyocyte level, the global force, the global deformation, the fluid dynamics, the valve dynamics, the myocardial perfusion, the generation of the ECG, numerical ECG through the torso, and the connection with the external circulation. So this is the mathematical model with all the, interactive or matching or interface connections between the different models through the conservation of physical quantities. Now the point is how to solve this problem. Of course, this is a big monster. It's a big monster also from the analytical viewpoint because there is very little known in terms of existence and uniqueness. There are some existence and uniqueness results for specific subfields, but not for the whole story. So there's a lot of heuristic behind this, but well, you have to hope that a solution exists and is unique because we, in the end, we are living people, and therefore this should have a solution, right? This is the belief of applied mathematicians. Now, this is the model, and to feed the model, you need data. So which data? Well, since we're talking about digital models, we're not in the regime of the big data, right? We need the data that are actually necessary and sufficient to feed this model. Okay? So it's not a matter of having many data. You need to have the right data to feed the model because those are PDEs, partial differential equations. So data come from specific people or specific patients. The model is general, is universal for a human heart, say, but data comes from specific people. And data come under the form of the actual, say, machines that you have in hospitals. So you have CT scan, you have CNMRI, magnetic resonance imaging, late gadolinium MRI or phase constant MRI, and we use those data to generate some of the data that are necessary to feed the model, to reconstruct shapes, to reconstruct motion of the external boundaries, and to find, for instance, scar zones. So this is a left ventricle, and from a real patient, you have black areas that are dead. This is after a stroke, say, and they are not conducting anymore. You have red regions that are still in a healthy shape, and then you have gray zones that are partly dead and partly still active. So you need this information to feed the model because you want to characterize that specific patient, say. Unfortunately, you don't have typically all the data that you would need to feed your PD model. You cannot ask patients to undergo zillions of exams to feed, to provide initial and boundary conditions, say, for the model. So sometimes you have to invent the data. This might seem kind of strange word, right? But you do not have all the data. In particular, what you don't have is what you see on the right picture here, which are the fibers. The fibers are very important because through the fibers you have the conduction of the electrical field, and then the fiber will create the torsion of the myocardium of the heart, and thanks to the torsion there will be the ejection of blood into the main, say, circulatory system. We don't have fibers because there are no machines in normal hospitals, say, that can produce the field of fibers. So you have to generate them mathematically, and kind of paradoxically, we use PDEs to generate data, those data. Typically you have data and you feed the PDEs. In this case, you need the PDE to generate data. Then once you have all the data that are needed for your problem, then you have to somehow reconstruct the shapes and then to use meshes. Meshes because in the end, you will have to project all the PDEs upon a subspace of finite dimension. Typically, the subspace of finite dimension is a finite element space or a finite volume space, so which is characterized by piecewise polynomial structures, and the different pieces are tetrahedra or hexahedra, which compose the whole organs. So in the end, you will have results of all those physical quantities say, on every one of those little volumes. And this will also dictate the numerical size of the problem that you have to solve. Of course, we are talking in the very end of non-linear algebraic system whose dimension can easily be of the order of 100 million, sometimes also 1 billion of variables. So if you can solve the whole thing, then you can see your heart beating. This is a healthy heart from a 20-year-old boy, healthy boy. What you see here is the active tension, namely the generation of the force at the cardiomyocyte level. So this is a kind of microscopic analysis. The scale is in kilopascal. We go from 0 to 80. And let me show it again. You will see the contraction, few heartbeats. A heartbeat takes about 1 second. This is quantitative, is dynamical, and this is something that doctors typically do not have, right? So it's an information that is very useful for doctor, also for understanding busy physiology. Right? So this is the heart beating, seen from the outside. This is the macroscopic deformation of the heart. We go from 0 to, this is the displacement in this case. We go from 0 to 2 centimeters, so the red is the maximum, is 2 centimeters. And what you see here, you have the left ventricle, and then you have the left atrium. You have the right ventricle and the right atrium. The big artery you see in the forefront is the pulmonary artery that brings venous blood to the lungs, where it releases CO2. It takes oxygen and goes back through 4 arteries. You see 2 over there and 2 on the other side, and they bring oxygenated blood to the left atrium, and through a valve that you will see in a little while, it will go into the ventricle, and when the ventricle squeezes in the systolic peak, blood will be ejected into the main, see the hollow tube that you see up there, which is the ascending aorta. So this is the electrophysiology combined with the active tension, which is the electric force generated at the cardiomyocyte level, and combined with the mechanics of deformation at the macroscopic level. Of course, you can go inside and seeing and looking at the fluid dynamics. So what you see here is this is the left heart, and this is the right heart. You see those valves. That one is the mitral valve, which connects the upper, say, left atrium with the left ventricle, and the other one is the pulmonary valve that connects the right ventricle with the pulmonary artery, and then there is the aortic valve, which is the one in the middle, the big one in the middle that allows blood to be ejected from the left ventricle into the main aorta. And what you see on the right-hand side is just a detail. For the left heart, this is the left ventricle, and this is the velocity field. You go from 0 to 1 meter per second. You see the creation of the vorticity. Again, you see the mitral valve up there and the aortic valve, the one that connects the left ventricle with the ascending aorta. So we see the vorticity, so it's a very rich structure from the fluid dynamics point of view. It's not turbulent. It's not turbulent in the healthy regime, but it might be turbulent if you have electrical, say, disturbances like ventricular tachycardia or atrial fibrillation. This is, as far as I know, the most complete heart model available today. Is validated in the sense that we have plenty of measures, plenty of collaboration with hospitals. I will not have the time to mention them, but where we solve specific problems, typically pathological problems, because doctor is interested in pathology, not in healthy people. But the point is the computational complexity. And I would like to mention some of the basic, challenges that we have here. The first one is that is a multi-scale and multi-physics problem. Multi-physics because different kind of physics, and multi-scale because you have, variations that occur at the scale and space scale from, 10 to the power minus 9 millimeter to 1 millimeter scale, say, or 1 centimeter scale, the scale of the organ. So you go from the scale of the cardiomyocyte to the scale of the organ. But also you have a temporal multi-scale, because the action potential that takes place in every single cardiomyocyte has the most important effect in the first, say, 1/3 of the heartbeat. And typically, to solve this problem, we use, for every second, for every heartbeat, we use order of 10,000 time steps in order to make sure that you capture the whole process. So the multi-scale aspect is very important, very challenging from the numerical viewpoint. Of course, this takes forever. Just to give you an idea, a single heartbeat, again, 1 second of real life takes, for the computation, takes about 4 hours on the Galileo at Cineca using 1100 cores, so 4 hours for a single heartbeat. Of course, it's very consuming also in terms of energy. We have a production of estimated production of about 35 kilos of CO2. So it's a big deal, and it costs 2,000 euros for the computation for a single heartbeat, for a single cell. So it's clear that you have to scale down in terms of complexity if you want to be more attractive for the doctors, and also if you have to be more sustainable in general. So we need to develop better methods, better algorithms to comply with this kind of difficulties. Of course, we need to address variability, go from a single person, single patient to a cohort of patients, so treating different shapes, noisy data, forcing terms. And there is the uncertain quantification part. There is a lot of uncertainty on the data, on the model coefficients. There are plenty of coefficients, order of 40 coefficients in all physical coefficients in all this model. And you want to see the way uncertainty in those data is propagated into the solution. We have to identify parameters and develop sensitivity analysis. We identify parameters because those parameters, those coefficients are not available for, say, specific patients. So we need to use measurements to go back and solving the inverse problem to identify those parameters. We need to develop reduced order models if you want to interrogate our system many, many times. And this is where, in all those cases, basically in all those issues, machine learning algorithms can help. So what you've seen so far is just, quote, quote, classical science, right? Or basic physical principles and numerics, of course. But now we want to move to try to combine this with, or to benefit from AI algorithms. And sometimes this is useful also to learn operators that would not be available from the physical standpoint. So this is what motivated us. This is what motivated us a few years ago to embrace machine learning algorithms. Again, not with the idea of replacing what we've been doing, but of, say, empowering or enhancing our results. So a few words on ML algorithms, or AI, say. Of course, there's many different ways to tell AI or to represent AI, but this is my, say, point of view. Artificial intelligence is, well, it's something that today is visible in many different applications: robotics, persistent computer vision, NLP, speech recognition, and much more. Artificial intelligence is, say, is empowered by machine learning algorithms, and machine learning algorithms, in their turn, are often, not exclusively, but very often grounded on artificial neural networks. And artificial neural networks, in particular in the past, I would say, 15 to 20 years, have been extremely powerful, mainly because of the use of deep learning algorithms, and in particular, generative AI is a subset of deep learning algorithms. So this is the kind of comprehensive picture, and the reason why this field that exists since 70 years, because the very first definition of AI was given by John McCarthy in 1955, right 70 years ago. So the reason why it's so popular now is because of recent discoveries, especially convolutional neural networks and deep neural networks, and of course transformers, which is behind the generative AI. And this is made possible by, say, the combination of three different factors: big data, algorithms, and computers. Data, or big data, because today we have the availability of many, many data. And it's estimated that by the end of 2025, there will be 175 zettabyte of data. Now, data means basically a real number or a word, right? And 1 zettabyte is 10 to the power 21. So it's easy to remember because this is the 21st century, so century of the zettabyte. Just to give you an idea of how many are, or how big is 10 to the power 21 byte, is like sitting and looking at a video, HD video, which goes on for about 36 trillion years. So this is 1 zettabyte. Of course, many data, you need big computers to address them. And big computers, today we have big computers, cloud computing, particular computers based on GPUs, which are very, appropriate to solve the minimization problems that are behind neural networks. And this is the biggest supercomputer, which is capable of carrying out 1.7 10 to the power 18 flops per second. Flops means floating point operations, so algebraic operation, basic algebraic operations. And again, this is equivalent to having all the inhabitants of our planet, about 8 billion, carrying out 200 million operations per second. So this is the power of the supercomputer. And of course, you need algorithms. So the algorithms are, as was mentioned before, especially the deep neural network. Again, not only artificial neural networks, there are many other, methods that can be used in this respect. For instance, least squares, random forest, decision trees, support vector machines, just to mention a few. Neural networks is not the only way to implement machine learning, but is perhaps today the most efficient way to solve machine learning problems, to really have machine learning. So what is machine learning? Machine learning, as the word suggests, is the capability of computers to learn, right? And so machine learning algorithms, in my understanding, differ from classical algorithms because classical algorithms operate typically deterministically and they are reproducible. Right? Machine learning algorithms, they may change dynamically and adaptively. So this is what actually makes the difference, in my understanding, between AI algorithms and algorithms that are not AI. There's a lot of confusion, and very often people, put a label of AI under algorithms that are not reproducible with AI, but this is my understanding. What is machine learning? Machine learning is the capability of computers to learn. And there are many definitions, in fact. Again, this is an area where there is a lot of fuzzy wording, many definitions of AI, many definitions of machine learning. This is the one that, these are the two definitions that I like the best. The first one is simply stating that learning is the process of transforming information into knowledge or expertise, and machine learning is automated learning. So it's the possibility of learning by an algorithm without programming that algorithm to learn. So it's a kind of automatic learning from the machine side. And Mitchell back in 1997 gave this kind of more operational definition. A computer program is said to learn from experience E. Experience would mean data, right, in this field. With respect to some task T, we need to have a task that we want to solve, and some performance measure P. This is a norm or a distance, say, if its performance on T measured by P improves with experience E. So, brutally speaking, the more data you have in principle, the better will be your learning algorithm. And the accuracy is measured according to a performance measure, basically. So this is the general concept, and I would like to just say a couple of words very quickly. We have different ways of helping the machine to learn. One is supervised learning. Learning means basically creating a function, a model function, that goes from input to output. No more than that, right? So you have data in input, and you want to look for an output, which are the answer to your problem. So learning means creating a function that goes from input x hat to output y hat, right? So supervised learning, both input and output are provided in the training set. We will see an example just in a little while. Unsupervised learning, you only have input, and you're not telling the machine what is the answer, what is the output. And then you have reinforcement learning, when the training set is not established a priori, but it can change dynamically. For example, you are in the trade market, you have information that the stock exchange can every single second, and you want to reinforce your learning through this additional information. So those are 3 examples of learning. This is the experience side of the story. Then you need to perform a task. And here you may have different kind of tasks. The classical one is, say, second one that you see here, regression. Regression means that you have a distribution of data and you want to learn the law. This is the input-output function, the law. So for instance, least squares is one answer to this question, right? You want to find the linear, the straight line that goes through this data and which minimizes the sum of the square of the distances. This is one example. This is regression. Otherwise, you have classification. You have different images. You have to recognize which one is the image of a cat or a dog or a fish, say. Then in that case, you have, say, a set of pictures. We call them x at I, and I between 1 and, say, 100. You have 100 pictures, digitalized pictures. You provide a label to every such picture. You put 1 if it is a dog, or 0 if it's not a dog. And you want the machine to learn for a new picture whether it is a dog or if it's not a dog. So this is classification. The 2 tasks goes under the supervised learning mode, say. Now, in the unsupervised, here are some of the tasks that we may have. Clustering. Clustering is the community detection in biology and social science or economics. You want to split a set of items into subset by finding similarities or differences. You have associations, and this is typical of a recommendation system. You have to discover the probability of the co-occurrence of items in a collection. You have density estimation that you can find in anomaly detection or for the generation of realistic scenarios. And then you have dimensionality reduction, when you want to find a compact, low-dimensional description of complex set of high-dimensional data set. So those are typical tasks that you may have. Then you need the model. So you have the experience, data, supervised learning, unsupervised learning, and reinforcement learning. You have task that you want to achieve, and then you need the model. And the model is the one that connects the input with the output. And I mentioned before many different kinds of models, and among them is the set of neural networks. And neural network, as I guess today everybody knows, is a way to mimic the behavior of a biological network of neurons. And neurons are connected one another through, of course, through connectors, right? And every neuron has the responsibility of taking information from its neighbors and propagating this information or stopping this information if it does not deem that information to be relevant. And this is reproduced by the, say, artificial neuron that you see, the gray box that you see over there. So we have information that comes under the form of real numbers, say, and then you perform operations that you see up there. You take a linear combination of those operations, of those data. So you have the sum of Wj, Xj. Xj are the data, the input data. Wj are the weights that should be learned by the model, and B is a bias, called bias. And again, is also B should be learned by the model. Now you compute Z, and before passing Z to the neighboring neurons, you have to apply an activation function that is called sigma Z. A sigma Z typically is a stepwise function, so 0 to 1. We pass 0, not relevant for my task, or you pass 1, say. Or you can modify this and regularize it, because mathematically speaking, this is better if you want to perform, say, compute gradients and minimize the problem. Why is there a minimization problem? Because in the performance measure, you want to make sure that your model F, neural network say, performs well at least on the training set. And then you minimize the sum of the errors that you make on the training set. So in the end, the parameters W and B will be determined by minimizing this function that is called loss function or cost function, say. So W and B, the set of W and B, will be determined by minimizing the function. But there is also another aspect of the story, and this is the architecture of the neural network. How many layers do you put? So those are input layers. Here you have the input data, so the 100 pictures to recognize a dot. Those are the neurons. You have different layers, and on every layer you have many neurons. Again, those are called hyperparameters, and those are in our hands. We have to decide a priori how many hyperparameters you want to use, and this is the output. So this is a deep neural network. You have several intermediate layers of neurons. Typically today you have order of 10 intermediate layers of neuron, and this is a shallow neural network. You have just one intermediate layer. So this is, very rapidly speaking, say, the model. Now, how good is this model? Well, first of all, this is an ongoing story. I'm not here to give you any ultimate conclusion, but let me say a few words on the basis of my experience. The machine learning algorithms typically are very effective when you have large volume of data, but more than that, you know the ground truth. You know what you're looking for. You understand the physics behind the problem. You understand the process behind the problem, what you are solving. So you are aware of the problem that you are solving. They are not very effective when the data sets are sparse or unlabeled. The ground truth is unknown. You want to use it in a blind manner. And there are many high consequences decisions which require interpretation from human beings. So I think we have to be aware of the fact that even though we have plenty of fantastic results when you use these algorithms, there are also some cases which are very disappointing. And of course, there is a need for a better understanding, better mathematical understanding. And again, I have to say that this is work in progress, but already there are some results. So let me just become a bit technical now. I hope not too much. So the goal is to approximate a function from a finite set of samples. That's a very general goal. You have many data, and you want to find a function that represents those data with respect to specific tasks. So the ingredients, you have an input and the target space that we call calligraphic x and y, and potentially a function that goes from x to y. And you have a probability distribution on the space x cross y, and you have a loss function, a distance function, where you measure the mismatch between what the model predicts and what is the actual truth in a supervised learning. Right? You remember the y at I answer. Right? Now the expected risk is R of f, is number 4, is the average of the distance between y and f of x with respect to the probability distribution, meaning that in principle we are spanning all the set of input data, potential input data x. You compute f of x thanks to your model, but then you know the truth, which is y, and you measure the integral of the distance between y and f of x, basically. You have an hypothesis space, H, which is a subspace of yx, and the hypothesis space is the space where you're actually looking for the model. Your F, your input-output model, will belong to this space. You have training set. Training set means a set of, again, remember that when you supervise learning, you have xi, which are the input data, and yi, which is the label, which is the truth. And since R of f, you cannot compute it, you replace it by an approximation that we call empirical risk. And this approximation is the 1 over n, so it's the average of all the distances between the predicted value corresponding to the data xy and the ground truth yi. Yi, you know it because, again, is a supervised learning algorithm. So this is Rsn of f. Very many definitions, sorry. And now the goal is to minimize R of f. So looking for that specific f at which will minimize the empirical risk. Now, the goal number two, is to do it on the hypothesis space. And this is f at h that you see on the hypothesis space. The hypothesis space is the yellow space that you have there. But since you replace R of f by Rsn of f, which is a numerical integration basically, you are actually looking for f at hs. But not even that, because this is the minimum of a minimization problem in a very high dimensional space. So you'll never be able to get the global minimum. You will approximate it by an iterative method. So in the very end, you will have an approximation. And the approximation is f at star hs. And this is what you are actually computing, right? So if you look at all these errors that you make, you can split it into 3 components, basically. The first one, you just use triangular inequality. The first one is the approximation error. And it goes back to the approximation theory. It tells you how good is your hypothesis space. You are looking for a model function, right? How good is the choice of the model, of the space for the model function? This is approximation theory. The second one is the difference between the empirical risk and the risk that you are actually computing, because you have to restrict it to the average of the error on the training set. And this is called generalization error. And this goes back to the statistical learning theory. It tells us how well the training set represents input and output spaces. How representative is the training set with respect to the whole process that we have in mind. And the last one is called the training error. It goes to the optimization theory. It tells us how well we have been solving numerically the optimization problem. How good is our global minimum that we have been obtaining numerically. So if you can control these 3 errors, in principle, you should be able to control the quality of the result of your machine learning algorithm, say. Now, how do we control this? That's very complicated, but there are some indicators. One is what is called the model capacity. Model capacity is the flexibility and the ability of the model to fit diverse data. Basically, it measures how rich is the hypothesis space. And you see, you may have 3 different behaviors. Of course, this is a very simple example. Assume that you have blue and red and yellow dot data, which may represent, I don't know, some quantities that are positive or negative, and you want to find a separator, basically, between these models. You may find different models. This is my function f. You see, if you go to the left-hand side, you have underfitting, because a linear model will not be enough to separate blue from red or blue from yellow. If you go to the right-hand side, this is called overfitting. Overfitting because your model, the black function, is very rich, and too rich is going to follow all the noises, for instance. It's extremely rich, and this is overfitting. And the optimal fitting in that case will be the picture that you see in the middle, right? Now, overfitting basically, which is a problem that occurs very many times, it tells you that you've been spending too much time to fit the training set, the data in the training set, but you'll not be able to generalize to other cases, which is what counts actually. Now, the capacity typically is determined by the hyperparameters. Hyperparameters, remember, is the number of layers and the number of neurons per layer, typically, and the choice of the activation function sigma. Those are hyperparameters. Hyperparameters are those that you do not minimize in general. You can also minimize them, but typically you don't minimize them. You decide them. These are the architecture of the neural network that you decide, basically. Then there is another indicator, which is the VC dimension. The VC dimension of a hypothesis space is the cardinality of the larger set of points that can be sheltered by H. Meaning that you can always construct a linear classifier. Let me give an example. Assume that you just have 3 points, 3 data, black and white data. If you have 3 data, those are the possible distribution of the 3 data, all the possible distribution of the 3 data, and the linear function will be able to separate black from white, right? As you see there. But if you have 4 points, like in this case, you see that the linear function will not be sufficient any longer because it could not separate this white from black points. So in this case, the dimension is 3. 3 is the maximum number of points, maximum number of data that you can separate by linear function in this specific case. Of course, you can generalize to many more data and to different contexts, but let me say that if the VC dimension is low, basically you have what is called the model learnability. In other words, your artificial neural network will be able to learn also on data that were not present in your training set, which is the most important objective that you may have. When the VC dimension is infinite, your model will not be able to learn, basically. So having a low VC dimension might be important, or relatively low, say, or not too big. Now, there are some results that try to combine these indicators. And this is a classical result which tells us that the soup between the soup from R of F and Rsn of F, remember R of F is the empirical risk and Rsn of F is an approximation that is obtained by using the training set. This soup is bounded by a certain square root. Now don't go through the details, but just look at the conclusion. If the VC dimension is fixed, when you take n going to infinity, n is the number of points that you have in your training set, big data, then this is fine. This error goes to 0. On the other side, if n is fixed, so you fix your training set, given number of data, 100 pictures for our dogs, and the DH tends to infinity, remember that if the DH goes to infinity, you learn, you lose the learnability. In fact, this inequality on the right-hand side goes to infinity, with a very bad generalization. So the good choice is to have n and dh that increase with the same rate for the best performance. So your training set should be growing with the same rate, with the same pace as the VC dimension to have the best performance. How do we choose the number of layers? And how many points per layer, how many neurons per layer? This is, again, the architecture of the neural network. First of all, okay, this is, actually, I should have used this slide before the 2 previous slides. Does it make any sense to use artificial neural networks to approximate input-output functions? Or otherwise say, how good are artificial neural networks to reproduce input-output functions? Now, if the input-output function is a continuous function, we know from basic mathematics that the space of polynomials is good in approximating every possible continuous function. Just to make an example, there is a theorem, very famous theorem that we teach our students in the very first year of calculus. This is Weierstrass theorem. We know that, for instance, polynomials are very good in principle to approximate the input-output function, but artificial neural networks are not polynomials, are very complex structures, very compositional function, right? The combination of functions that are composed in many different ways. Are they good enough? And there is this very reassuring result by Sibenko in 1989 that tells us that under suitable conditions, this is actually the case, in the sense that for every potential continuous function, there exists a shallow neural network, shallow means with a single layer of neurons, that approximate arbitrarily well, with the desired accuracy, the exact unknown input-output function. So using artificial neural network for input-output functions that are continuous is a good idea from the mathematical standpoint. And you can even improve this result if you have, more regularity in your input-output function. If you have more regularity in your input-output function, and you have a shallow neural network, a single layer of neurons, you can basically have an indication of the number of neurons to be put for, you see, this layer, in this case, n1 is 4, the number of neurons, depending upon epsilon, which is the accuracy that you want, and S, which is, say, an index of the smoothness of your input-output function in the sober spaces. So if you have S derivatives of our input-output function, which are in L2, so we are in the space WS2 or WSP, say, in LP, then we have a precise estimate, asymptotically speaking, of the number of neurons that are enough to achieve a specific accuracy. So the estimate is sharp. The larger the number of neurons, the better it is, in the sense that the smaller epsilon, therefore a fixed epsilon, the higher the regularity of F, the lower the number of hidden neurons, which is very reassuring. I mean, artificial neural networks are doing their good job, right? They are respectful of the properties of the input-output function that is unknown. And you even have a kind of constructive indicators. And if you use deep neural network, you are actually improving the estimate. Now, I'm not pretending to go into all the details over there, but let me just go to the conclusion. Deep neural network can represent functions, some functions that shallow neural network will not be able to represent. So they have more representation capability. Deep neural networks typically are more efficient in the sense that with the same number of global neurons, they are more efficient than shallow neural network. And if you use the same number of parameters, globally speaking, deep neural network can represent more complex functions than shallow neural network. So, takeaway message. Even shallow neural network has the possibility of representing all continuous functions very well. And if you use deep neural network, you can improve your accuracy. Having said that, there are plenty of open problems. Some of them are mathematical problems, others are more general problems that has an impact also on the society. One is interpretability, the second is explainability, and then reproducibility, and then is complexity. Instead of giving definitions, I will just try to, say, guide you on a specific example. Say, comparing least squares with artificial neural network. Least squares is a very old method that was invented by Gauss long ago to discover the trajectories of series. It's a very simple idea. In the end, I mean, all powerful ideas in mathematics very often are simple ideas, and I guess all of you know it. So what is least squares? You have a distribution of points. Look at the picture over there to the left. You have a distribution of points, and you make an ansatz. You want to look at a function that will be able to reproduce all these points. This is not interpolation. I mean, this function should not go through the points. It should be a low-dimensional function that is able to reproduce the behavior. Right? You see a linear case and a non-linear case. Linear case, the coefficient of the basis function should intervene linearly or non-linearly in our problem. So you have target data, xi and yi. You look for parameters, w. That's why in the literature, this method is also considered a machine learning algorithm, because you have to learn those parameters. I think it's a bit of a stretching definition, but okay, assume that you use this analogy. So those are the parameters of the least square model. For instance, if you look for linear functions, you have only two parameters. Say a plus bx, right? A and b are the two parameters, say. Now, the model. In this case, you are using a polynomial of degree 4, sorry, of degree 3, so you have 4 parameters you see over there, f of x, w. And in that case, this is a linear case because the parameter will show up linearly. In the second case, we look for a kind of exponential function depending upon the model and the distribution of data. And in this case, this would be a non-linear least square problem. The loss function, the one that you want to minimize, is just the distance between the predicted value of f and the yi values, the sum of the square. You want to minimize this function, and then you want to find those parameters, w star, that minimize that function. Minimizing means taking the gradient and setting it equal to 0. There are very few parameters, typically 2, 3, 4, right? Even though you have thousands of data, right? And when you compute this quantity here, you find either a linear system, algebraic system, or a nonlinear algebraic system, but of very little dimension. It's called the normal equations. So you solve it directly. So computationally speaking, the cost is negligible in that case. Again, this is one possible model that you can consider in the framework of machine learning algorithms. You want to learn those parameters. How do you compare it with the neural networks? Well, if you compare it with neural networks, the loss function can be the same. What you have seen before was the mean square error. In machine learning algorithms, you can use neural network algorithms, say more precisely. You can use more sophisticated measures, but this is not the big difference. The big differences are parameters. There are very few in the least square case and very many in the numerical, artificial neural networks. Minimization algorithms. Typically, in the least square case, you compute explicitly the gradient of J of the loss function. So this is very easy, and then you use direct solvers or nonlinear, or in the nonlinear least square, use Newton algorithms. Here, very often you use stochastic gradient descent with neural network because you are minimizing the problem in a very high dimensional space. It's very easy to end up in a local minima, and you want to jump out of local minima, and that's why we use stochastic algorithms. But what is more interesting, perhaps, is the lower part of the picture. Complexity, very low for least squares, very high for machine learning, which is expected because you are using many, many parameters and stochastic algorithms. Interpretability. Everything is interpretable with least square. You know what you're doing. We know what is the role of the parameters. We know which kind of function you are using to reproduce your physical process. And this is very problematic with machine learning algorithms. Typically, you do not understand what you are doing. You cannot interpret it. That's why very often we call those methods black box models. So that's a very important issue. Reproducibility. Can you reproduce the algorithm, the same result, under the same input data? Yes, for least squares, but yes, also for neural network. And this is a bit surprising because very often people say that this is not the case, but it is the case. At least if you use classical neural network, you can reproduce the same kind of result. Of course, if you use, say, generative AI or adversarial neural networks or generative algorithms, this is no longer the case because you have a stochastic part, say, involved. But if you use classical neural network, the method is reproducible. Learnability. This is a very important discriminator. If you use least square, you decide a priori which kind of shape function you are going to use. You decide if you want to use linear functions to find your least square solution, or polynomial functions, or exponential function. So you need to exploit information and use the information that you have in your physical problem. With artificial neural network, you don't care about that. I mean, the algorithm is so complex, the subspace of functions is so complex that they will learn the structure. Let me give you a very simple example. I have a new material, right? I want to compute the constitutive law of this new material. The way the strain depends on the stresses, right? You apply a force to this new material, you want to see the way it will deform. Right? If you use least square methods or classical methods, scientific say computation, typically, you decide a priori which kind of law you are expecting, and then you allow your least square algorithm to find that law. You decide if the behavior is linear or non-linear, and what kind of behavior you have. If you use a neural network, it will find the constitutive law for us. Unfortunately, it will not come under the form of an explicit function, but it will deduce the input-output relationship for the constitutive law. So this is very important to notice. These methods can actually learn. This method does not learn, right? It's you that you decide what kind of function you want to reproduce. So there are very many open problems here, and now comes to the scientific machine learning. Scientific machine learning is just the way to combine classical scientific computing with machine learning. So we can think that the temple of science that until the end of the last century was sustained by three-pillar theory, experiments, and simulation things. since the mid of the last century. Now there is a fourth pillar, which is artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms. That's the way I see it. That's the way you see the cooperation. There are many different ways you want to create cooperation between physics-based models and machine learning algorithms. So in my understanding, this is not a dual representation, right? Those are not alternative, but actually potentially collaborating. There are many different ways you can use one for the other and the other for the first one. And here's just some wording on recent developments in this field. Now, of course, I do not have the time to go into any detail, but these are names of methods that have been proposed in the past year, I'd say in the past 2 or 3 years, in the scientific machine learning strategy. You want to create surrogate model for high fidelity digital models. Basically, you want to use neural network for sensitivity analysis and Bayesian parameter estimation. We want to inform your artificial algorithms, artificial intelligence algorithms by the physics. And these are called physics-informed learning. So you have PINs, physics-informed neural networks. In the loss function, you have to add the residual of the PDE, if you know the PDE, if you know the process. Or you may have variational form of PDEs, the deep reads method, and or method that called they optimize the discrete loss. Or operator learning, which is even, I mean, that's very exciting in the sense that you don't know the operator, which is behind the physics, you want to discover it. Again, not in the form of an explicit expression, but at least in the form of an input-output function. I mean, you give data to your you don't know what kind of PDE, but you give data, and your artificial neural network will be able to recover the solution. So there are many different new developments, and this is the way we've been using it, actually. We've been using the dual way. We start from a data-driven, so what you see in the upper part is just pure artificial intelligence algorithm that you are going to empower with, techniques that come from scientific computing, so from the knowledge of physics. And the other way around. The other way around is where we start from scientific computation. We know everything about the model, like in the case of the art, right? We know everything about the model, but we use artificial intelligence algorithm to, for instance, to produce data that are missing. We don't know coefficients, and we want to use artificial intelligence algorithm to produce those data. Or you don't know constitutive laws. You want to learn some operator that are, for instance, the microscopic scale that you do not know. And you want to discover the latent dynamics. What is happening in the latent space? A latent space is a small dimensional space that in principle is capable of reproducing your task. And you want to see the way the latent space will evolve in time. Or develop and reduce order models to get rid of the complexity. Those are just a few examples. And let me go to the end. I think that scientific machine learning is really a way to take the best advantage of, scientific computation as we know it, and machine learning algorithms. It's a way, in the end, to combine what we can call the human intelligence, the one that has been, granting us these fundamental laws of physics, right? Which is then translated into PDEs and artificial intelligence algorithms. Obviously, we cannot pretend, at least this is my personal viewpoint, that AI and natural intelligence will, at a given time, overlap. I think there are things that artificial intelligence can do much better than humans today, and the other way around, there are things that humans do very well, artificial intelligence algorithm cannot do. And these are very silly examples, but it's nothing to do with science. But see, you want to load a washing machine, and every kid can do it, and there is no robot that can do it today. Or you want to have a driver license, and in, say, 10 to 20 lectures, you can understand how to drive a car, and there is no autonomous driving car of level 5, which are fully autonomous, just to give an example. And those are fields where artificial intelligence has been investing immense amount of money. Okay. On the other side, artificial intelligence algorithm can beat the best champions in games, in precision surgery, in image analysis and recognition, in natural language recognition. These are just few examples where you see that there is a big mismatch between the capabilities one and the other. And there is this paradox, more or less paradox. We say that what is easy, very often what is easy for humans is difficult for artificial intelligence and vice versa. So in my understanding, artificial intelligence amplifies human intelligence. The innovation is always driven by humans. We should know the ground truth. We should know the value of what we're doing, right? And have a full, being fully aware of the importance of what we're doing, but it's supported by technology. And now is mostly technology. Even though we have to be very careful. First of all, there are many different problems, mathematical problems that are still to be understood, so I'll skip it because we'll just think of a method. Oops, it's late, I'm going to finish. So if you look in the perspective of having an AI society, we have problem with safety. We have robots that can make a mistake and you don't know which is the responsibility of the mistake. We have problem with security, risk in self-driving cars. Again, we have an accident. Is it because the training set has not been good enough? Or which is the responsibility? We have problem with privacy, especially with generative AI. We have problem with sustainability. I mean, it's amazing the amount of energy that is consumed by data center just for the training of neural networks. It's expected that, you see, in Italy, it's 2023 needed 300 terawatt hour of electricity for global consumption, and for say for 2026 it is expected that 3 times that much will be needed just to feed to train the neural networks, and many other problems. Say, and of course there is a big discussion about the suitability of the actual computers, which are still phenomenal computers. Do we really need? Can we move on with quantum computers or neuromorphic computers, where you have or biological computers, where you try to replace basically the artificial neurons with biological structures, or with PDEs that are better representing the action potential that takes place of every neuron. This is work in progress, and I believe that a very important point is the education. The education in both sense, education of young people, because there is an incredible demand of specialists in artificial neural network from one side. In Italy, the ratio is 1 to 5. You have 5, say, possibility, and 5 call, 5 demand of specialists, and just 1, which is already on the market. But also a better democratization, meaning a better knowledge for every people, because we fear what we do not understand, and very often people do not understand what is behind here in terms of potential, but also in terms of risk. And I think that we need to invest on education in order to have, and I feel this responsibility to tell people what there is behind, not to you, but people who are not scientists, say what is behind and what they can expect and what they cannot expect, right? And with that, I will conclude. And if you are interested, there is a very recent paper. It's a long paper, about 200 pages, where we try to, it's a review paper on scientific machine learning, and maybe you can find some interesting results. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Professor Quarteroni. So we have time for a few questions. Use this microphone, and Professor Quarteroni will reply from you.
Thank you, Alfio, for the very inspiring and enjoyable lecture. I wish I had some technical questions to ask, but I will not. And I will go straight to your last slide concerning democracy, democratization, and the like. I don't know how many of you have watched the speech of J.D. Vance.
Sorry?
I don't know how many of you have watched the speech of J.D. Vance at the AI conference in Paris. It was blood-chilling. It was really something frightening, the posture of the United States with respect to this problem. And I think the the main thing of democratization is the existence of multiple parties that you can choose among. And the question is, what do you think it will take for Europe to bridge the gap, the knowledge and technological gap between us and the giants in the US and China? And it's just a matter of money. I mean, 200 billions would be enough to accomplish the task, or is there any other more profound difficulties that would have to be overcome?
So thank you, Stefano. This is a great question. I mean, I do not have answers that are carved in the rock for that, but have some personal opinion. I think DeepSeek has been telling us an important thing. DeepSeek is this, it's telling us that open source may win. And open source is what distinguishes between what has not been done in the US and what is done typically in other contexts. I'm not necessarily mentioning China, right? Even though these come from China. What you do, typically is open source, right? And open source is a way to go. There is a big gap, and the big gap is the availability of data. And we should not hide the fact that these big players, 4 or 5 big players, are all from US. I'm not talking about China, because this is less known, but they're coming from China, and they have a big advantage because they have data. And we keep providing them data with social media and with Starlink-like, and see. So that's a very big gap. On the other side, if we think in terms of development, algorithmic development, mathematical development, physical development, I do not think that we should be too shy in Europe, and not only in Europe, say, because after all, many of these main developers over there are from Europe. So I think that we should not be too shy for that. Of course, we need to invest money. It's not only a matter of money. I mean, this development in China has been carried out with much less money, right? Even though now someone is questioning about the fact that the way that's been working has been, basically using part of the knowledge that was produced by OpenAI, but this is still debated. From the technical viewpoint, to me, this is not, say, we still have hope that you can fill this gap in Europe. Another issue is the ethical problem, right? I mean, those companies, well, they are not, they're there to make benefits, right? So they are there to optimize their revenues, basically. And as you know, all means are acceptable in this world to make revenues. Now, Europe, of course, have an AI Act already, and we'll have to move within the framework, within a perimeter of clear regulation. And this will be an obstacle inevitably, because this is obvious. On the other side, this is also part of our culture. So, in the end, the availability of data is a big gap, and here we are suffering. In terms of conceptual development, I think that we have our game to play within a framework which will be very likely more regulated than in the US, and hopefully not too much regulated. But again, here we need to look for a kind of, super governmental agreement. You cannot confine, you see, you cannot develop an AI for Europe and AI for the United States. Sooner or later, you have to try to sit down and try to ending up with some conclusion that everybody will accept. So I'm optimistic from the scientific point of view. I'm a bit less optimistic from the availability of data and from the willingness of data administration to actually start these type of discussions.
questions.
Hi, thank you very much for the seminar. I would like to ask you your opinion about training. Okay, I think here we are not just talking about training for very high competence skill in developing the algorithm, but it's also training for young generation on using some of those app or methods without knowing what is behind. So what is your opinion in how the school can help in changing the methodology to help the young kids to develop some skills in synthesis, in generating text, that it's something different from what they can do with those kind of algorithms. So I don't know if it is clear, my question. Okay.
I think that this is not, I mean, in my personal experience, this is not too dramatic in the sense that I've seen people growing at university level very rapidly in managing these tools and understanding what is behind. Again, there are some limits in the interpretability. I try to underline some of them. But see, to me, it's much more difficult to understand PDEs and how to solve PDEs than how to use these tools. So I don't think this is a big obstacle. The point is that universities are not generally prepared to do that. I'm not talking about in the average, right? But I think that you have to have more awareness. So very often what you can find in the market are zillions of courses offered. Of course, you have to pay. And very often those courses tells you what you can do with, but not what it is behind. So they are conceived for the users, not for the developers. Universities and schools should, train the developers. And the reason why I'm optimistic is that, I've been presenting not this material, but a much simpler material to schools, to high schools in Italy many times. And I was amazed to see that reality is already there. There are very many schools where you have labs, students working on neural network and trying to solve problems of many different kinds using neural networks, and they have a reasonable awareness of what is going on. So to me, the mystery, quote, comes from ignorance, right? But when you actually go into the matter, you see that you can actually work with them and with proper training. For instance, I try to underline some mathematical issues behind. After all, is the construction of a function, right? A complicated function because it's a compositional function, but you have things that are much more difficult in math than doing that, right? So if you break down the different difficulties, you see that you can develop a vision and then a strategy for education. And I think this is very important. It should be done. There's a question here. There's another there.
Thank you very much. Very inspiring talk. I want to, I don't know whether it's actually a question, but I've been working in machine learning for over 20 years now. And so I know many of the people that have actually become incredibly successful and made companies and so on. I know from before, right? So I don't know whether it's ever happened in human history that scientists were catapulted at being so close to the masters of the universe, right? So a guy I was sharing an office with, I suddenly see him say, head of Facebook AI fairness, deciding how to handle the Indian election, 1 billion people. So to me, my impression is that we actually need training ourselves in understanding what is the real impact of what we are doing and how we speak as a community to highlight. You said we fear what we don't know. Actually, if we know it, sometimes we fear it even more. And I very often feel that way. So I know these guys, smart guys, but they've been catapulted into a world that is not their world, and they are, acting as if this was all a game, right? And we are seeing Stefano said before, it's not a game. It's really not a game.
No, I see your point. I've been working for an Italian association of, say, companies. It's called Assolombarda. Assolombarda is one of the branch of Confindustria in Italy. So I've been talking with hundreds of thousands of little companies in Lombardy and that environment. And I'm not answering specifically to your question. I will come back to your question, but just to give you the idea of the sentiment that's around. I mean, all those companies they have an urgent need to say that they're using AI algorithms, because otherwise they will not be able any longer to sell their products as before. But they don't have any ideas, right? Any ideas. And when they don't have any ideas, very often they are just the prey of the big companies that come and tell them that they have the solution to all your problems. Just inject this tool and you will solve all your problems with artificial intelligence. And what we start to see, not only in Italy, is that you have problems with the budget after a while. They make this investment and they spend money and they get anything out of that money because they don't know indeed what to do with this. And to me, this is very clear. I mean, at least from the practical viewpoint. Then you can go to the ethical issues. From the practical viewpoint, of course, here they promise to solve every single problem. And this is the fascinating point, right? I mean, you can confuse people because you come and you say, well, look, with this tool, you will solve your problem and you get an increase of 10%, 12% on your revenues and so on and so forth, which is not true. You have to move from the other side. This is a top-down story to me. What is your objective? And you have to understand whether or not these tools will be helpful for you. And this is not always the case. This is very rarely the case. Very often you can use statistical tools that are very classical to solve your problem. And you don't need these fancy neural networks. But people do not understand it, and they are victim of the, you see, of the propaganda. So there is a lot of propaganda here, which makes, introduce a lot of noise in the market in general sense. I mean, those people that you are mentioning, the point is that there is so much money that in the end, most of this development will be driven by that money. And this is something that escapes our understanding and our control. And there's nothing that you can do here, I believe. And now we go back to the question of Stefano. I mean, we as Europeans, what can we do to contrast this, which occur far from ourselves and with agendas that are completely different than ours? So is this threatening? Yes, it is. I mean, I try to show why I'm using this tool to solve my scientific problems. And I believe that there is an incredible avenue here to improve with respect to what I've been doing for 40 years of my scientific life. There's no doubt for me about that. Now, the use that you can make out of this, that's a different story. We have the nuclear power. I don't know if this is an appropriate consideration, but you have the nuclear power, right? And we have been using destructively, we, the humankind, have been using destructively only once in our life, fortunately. Because then, and this was 8 years ago, right? And because everybody could see, even ordinary people could see the impact and the damages, right? There is something material there. You do not need to understand fusion or fission to see the effects. There is a lot of ignorance here in the general public, including the politicians, right? Those that should have to implement strategies, take decisions. There's a lot of ignorance. From one side, you don't understand the potential completely. From the other side, you don't understand the limits. So this is a big issue, right? So in 80 years, we have been refraining from using nuclear energy in a destructive manner because we had developed, you see, supranational institutions, and because we have developed awareness of the potential risk. We are not yet there here. Now we only see the excitement. And when you see the kids, last week I was in Puglia in Italy and meeting with some 4,000 or 5,000 people from different towns, high school people. And you see the way they are excited to use ChatGPT for their ordinary, say, for the homework, right? But even for investing, I had 2 kids, 17 or 18 years old. They came to me and they asked me, do you really trust artificial intelligence? And then after a while, when I try to answer questions on a technical basis, they say, no, maybe we have to reformulate our question. I have part of my capital, 18-year-old guy, right? I've had 2/3 of my capital invested in AI algorithm, in AI companies. Should I keep it or should not keep it? And these are the type of questions that you have. So you see that young generations, and I think you have to care about this, young generation are much ahead of what we think in this business, and very often without really a real awareness. And even worse, their teachers are not prepared to help them. So, of course, I understand that this is not the answer to your big questions, but at least you have to create a humus, an understanding which at least shows which are the most important, say, risks that we are facing. And you have to start from the school. And we're very far from there. And students are using these things. They are using them in a very creative way. You know, if you have children, you know that they are extremely creative in this respect. So this is a responsibility that I believe we do have, we scientists, to help them better understand what is going on. And then is the role of politicians to take decisions. But they should be informed decisions.
There is time for a last question.
Of course, I'm not answering the immorality of those roommates that you had that now are sitting on a big power, not only economical power.
So thank you for the talk. My question is perhaps slightly more technical. I was wondering, isn't there still a tension between the approach you proposed with PDEs and a very complex mathematical modeling and the employment of machine learning? In that, I think neural networks are interesting for 2 reasons. First, they have a very low bias on the bias variance trade-off spectrum. And second, it's really the best you can do when you want to do parallel computing, which you must do because you have complex problems. But the question is, what about the variance? Because if you do scientific computing and you model carefully, I think what you're striving for is a very high level of control on, for example, the dynamics of the heart of whatever you're studying. And if you use neural networks, as you said, it doesn't matter how much data you have, it matters the quality. So how can you kind of transfer what's been done with large language models into the average scientific problems in which you don't really have much data and you can't really control for variances? Because already for large language models, we've basically used everything humanity has ever written. Thanks.
I mean, my answer is very simple and very clear. Today, tomorrow I don't know. Today I will not trust. I don't trust them. I mean, scientific machine learning is grounded on theory. We know the limit of this theory. We know when we can safely use it, which are the limits. We know how to control the errors because we have mathematical tools. Well, we have physical understanding to understand whether a model is good enough because we have validation in the end. So in the end, we know how to compare with the reality. We know mathematical theory for the PDEs. We know the mathematical theory for the numerical algorithms. We know the mathematical theory to control a round of errors with the computers, and so on and so forth. Everything is under control. And strong statement. If you have to solve a problem where you know the model, the mathematical model, do not believe that you can beat your mathematical model, scientific computing, say, with an artificial algorithm. If it's a one-shot solution, no way to beat it, okay? That's not the way we use it. We use it to enhance our solution, or because you construct low-dimensional spaces, for instance, because if you do not know, for instance, constitutive laws, for instance, if you go to a microscopic level in the heart, you do not know, physically speaking, the way, or mathematically speaking, the way the active force is generated out of the electrical inputs. You don't know it. And we need it. It's extremely important to be used in the model, right? So this is where we use, when we do not enough knowledge, we can use artificial neural networks to help. We can use artificial neural network to reduce the complexity. We use artificial neural network to explore the set of parameters that are unknown and try to identify or to find the sensitivity analysis and so on and so forth. So to me, if you know the mathematical model, this is something that is written in the rock. I mean, it would be completely silly not to use it in a way or another. So this is my driving mechanism. And then I use AI as a technology to empower this mechanism. But I'm driven by my mathematical knowledge. But I would be also a little silly not to consider this potential. Remember, 4 hours on a big supercomputer for a single second. I mean, when you go and you want to discuss with cardiologists, and they are interested in looking at different scenarios, they have to make an operation, they have to explore different type of paradigms, they want to see the outcome. I mean, you cannot tell each of them that, I mean, I will come back in 1 month because you have to carry out all this simulation, it will take forever, right? I mean, to me, if you are an applied mathematician, you need to accept the compromise of delivering the perfect solution and the useful solution. And the usefulness is always measured with respect to what is today available. If I can increase by 1% or 2% or 10%, it might be already enough. So I need to accept compromises. I need to use, to leave the perfect realm of PDEs and basic fundamental principles and first laws, to accept a little compromise and a little help from those guys, which is decisive. And again, I'm not ignoring all the problems that are behind, including the fact that interpretability is not always possible. And if I'm a medical doctor and I have to convince a patient that this surgery is better than this one, if you tell him or her that I, the medical doctor, came up with this conclusion on the basis of my experience and my knowledge, the patient will trust you. If you tell a patient that this comes from neural network analysis, and if you are not able to interpret the result that you have been obtaining, it's not interpretability, that's a big issue. That's a big responsibility. So it really depends on what you want to do with that. Now, there's been a question at the very beginning about the training, right? I mean, if you go in a computer science department, even 10 years ago, 20 years ago, they were using happily artificial neural networks to solve their problems. And very often they were not able to solve the problem, and most often they were able to do it, and they did not care. So they've been developing incredibly sophisticated algorithms with very little understanding. This is not what, say, hard science typically wants to do, right? So if you're a physicist, you're a mathematician, you want to ground this on something more solid. But we should not disregard the fact that convolutional neural networks, deep neural networks, transformers, which had modified our life today, most often been developed by people were not necessarily physicists, were not necessarily mathematicians. And I think we have to accept this. We have to accept it and to face this. And you try to develop our own opinion, but to take advantage of this. That's my personal opinion.
I think that it's time to thank again Professor Quarteroni.
Thank you. Thank you.
Professor Quarteroni will stay around till mid-afternoon. I know that probably there are more questions. And have a nice continuation of your day.